to be more, to further bring the reform agenda to the right track. But then by 2013, then we started to see that the hands by the army or the army-backed ruling party able to utilize all the resources. The opposition had a very little space to really maneuver in the parliament. But then the civil society, we were more active because for us, we see our role as a vibrant civil society. If we can be more vibrant, more independent, and more strategic, being assertive of our role in the reform agenda, in the different sectoral reform, policy reforms like education or health or economic, and we see that that we can actually make the significant contribution in this reform to get onto the right track. But then we come to be experiencing in our attempts and efforts, also link into the international entities, link into the international community, and also the international mechanisms, and trying to bridge. But then we came to be realizing the point that the government will give us some lip service, more window dressing, accommodation to our space in dealing with the international community in Naypyidaw. But then what the government is doing is nurturing and consolidating their government-organized NGOs. Those government-organized NGOs are the ones who are registered, and they do have more of a formal space in the reform agenda. We, the international development partners, come and do the consultation, donor, donor meeting or different policy recommendation meetings. The government-organized or government-affiliated, government-sanctioned NGOs are the ones who get the space. When the independent civil society, not necessarily registered, because we don't believe the civil society has to be registered, approved by the government permission thing, we don't believe in it. But then, of course, we are also the rightful primary stakeholders of this country. So the civil society is really participating, being assertive of our role. But then we become more of a tick box, like in a meeting, to a very small percentage of us will be invited, and then in the reality, when the decision making comes, we are not there. So after that couple of years experience, we got really frustrated. But at the same time, dealing with the parliament, when the parliament started to come up with the new laws, such as, for example, Article 18 of the Peaceful Assembly and Procession Law, which many of the human rights activists are being charged with that law. That kind of control mechanism laws always come up without our knowledge or without our participation or consultation with the public. The same thing with the association law when it came, but we were very quick in responding. So we organized, nationally, and then we reached to the parliament immediately, and we work with the international groups such as ICNL that you all know. Then we really pushed the parliament to make it right, because it has to be a voluntary, if even there is a law is to be adopted. But the government wants a mandatory register. If you are found not registered, you can be imprisoned up to 3 years kind of thing. We're like, we're not in the dark age, we're moving forward to the democracy. So we were very against that, right? So I'm just giving you one particular example is, after we were able to have some success with working with the parliament, together with the international community, that law was adopted somewhat more in favor of our cause. That's been accommodated in the law. But in our country, the problem comes with the bylaws. Who controls the bylaw? It's Ministry of Interior, led by the Army General. And Ministry of Interior is perceived as the headquarters of the prison in our country by the general public. And when it comes to the bylaws, that's where all the problem comes. No matter how the law can be good from the parliament, once it comes to the bylaw, parliament has no oversight on this anymore. Parliament cannot say or get involved in that anymore. That's where the problem comes. So in the backsliding of the reform, because we see our civil society, especially the human rights oriented or the rights-based civil societies space, come to be more scrutinized in the last 2 years. And we become more and more under surveillance. The special branch intelligence ask organizations to give them the report, give them the information, like tapping the phone, following where we go, coming into our meetings with the recorders that we cannot tell them to leave, that kind of situation. So even just on that particular point, I just want to share with you. But yes, there are different other sectors are actually backsliding too.
Okay, thank you. Just before I open it up for a very general discussion with the audience, I just wanted to come back to Namalka on this interesting point that you were addressing at the end, Omar, on two aspects. One being, to what extent is the Sri Lankan government indicating how domestic civil society will be a part of designing reforms at the national level that are being sort of committed to in some ways internationally, first. And secondly, there was this long period of severe surveillance by security forces of human rights defenders. And just any comment from you on whether, it's always hard to know, the full extent of secret surveillance, but do you have a sense of whether there has been an actual change in recent weeks, months?
January 8th, when the change came in, I would say the term I used was I'm relieved. Mentally, yes, because the manner in which the state carried out the persecution against human rights defenders, the manner in which our space was encroached by the surveillance, the fears we had is no more. But the system has not been changed. When I say that, there are still reports coming from the local NGOs that there is a sense of surveillance, especially in the areas in the north, not very much in the eastern province. But personally, I have gone to north on several occasions, and I have had freer discussions with the community there after I was there in February twice. But there have been cases by some mothers to say that they are still being watched. So it's not normal in the north. Though in the south, we have a different culture where, the fact that the surveillance, continuation of surveillance is no more. And the NGO secretariat has come under the Prime Minister, not anymore under the defense establishment, but the NGO circular that related to the restrictions have not yet been removed. And some of us are having some discussions with the Prime Minister now with regard to the removal of the NGO document. So there are some discussions, but I'm smiling at you when you said, the consultations with the NGOs are very, very little now compared to the previous era. Now everybody is in government. We find it very difficult to get time from our former friendly ministers who used to be in close dialogue with the civil society before they came to power. And it is very disappointing to see the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, which I saw in the website. It is dashing my hope of true democracy coming into Sri Lanka, because it is not abolishing the executive presidency, which was a major challenge to democracy in Sri Lanka, the rule of law and the establishment of independent judiciary, which ICJ had been doing a lot of studies. The present 19th Amendment does not meet the aspirations of the democratic loving people of Sri Lanka. There's still time. for negotiation. But the first draft that I have seen is not very promising.
Okay, thank you very much again to both of our panelists who will remain engaged in the conversation, but I would also like now to really open up the floor to everyone, either to return to topics that we've already covered or to raise new things. I would ask you again to please identify yourself before you speak, and to try and keep your comment or question to a minute or two, and we will, as appropriate, also come back to the panelists. So is there anyone who'd like to take the floor? Yes, yeah.
Thank you. First off, I just want to thank you for organizing this panel. I've been going to as many of the Myanmar side events as I can because, as I spoke with Ms. Almar yesterday, just knowing all the parallels, so it's wonderful to see a panel that is actually bringing these two issues directly together. I have a two-part question for Ms. Fernando. Oh, and I'm sorry, my name is Gauri Koneswaran. I'm with Pasumai Thayagam. My two-part question is this. First, I just want to clarify, because I almost think I may have taken incorrect notation here. If I correctly noted this, what I believe you had said is, in terms of the HRC and relation between what's happening at the national level in Sri Lanka and within the international community. But to clarify, I believe you said the country is able to handle itself and should be dealing with this domestically, but then you also acknowledged later that the main perpetrators are still in power. For example, the best example of that would be the new president, Maithripala Sirisena, who was the acting defense minister during the last phase of the armed conflict when so many of these war crimes and crimes against humanity occurred. And so that's my first question, is just clarifying to make sure I understand. And then secondly, I'm just going to put the second part of my question out there now as well, because I think even outside of this specific issue, it's something that I think is important to think about as human rights defenders. And here my question is this, and something for all of us to think about, acknowledging our privilege and incorporating it into our work when we are outside of the community that's been so affected. And I'll give my own personal example. I am Alam Tamil from Sri Lanka, but I was born and raised in the United States. I do this advocacy work in the US and internationally. I've done it in Sri Lanka as well, but I'm always highly attuned to the fact that what I say and my perspective may be very different from many of the Tamils on the ground who've suffered these things directly. And I think it's important to acknowledge that privilege and then, like I say, take the additional step of incorporating it into my advocacy. And so that's my second question. It's wonderful to have someone from outside of our community, in the sense of not a Tamil person, doing some of this work and speaking to these issues. But then my question is, as someone who's clearly, very respected, Ms. Fernando, and you clearly have decades of experience doing legal work and advocacy work, to what extent is that something that you take into account, especially in this sort of international environment? And I'll also just add one final thing. I'm very happy to have this panel and to see it. I was very excited to learn that it was happening this morning. At the same time, I was a little surprised to see that the two speakers, one is representing an ethnic minority community for whom she's speaking. And I've just met so many different Tamil advocates just in the past week here, many of whom are here. And so it's just interesting to me that none of them were asked to speak.
Okay, well, on your last comment, I invite you to speak to the organizers, and I mean, as you remarked, there are a number of events taking place, but I wouldn't really be able to speak to how they decided who would speak here at this particular event today. I think I can answer your first question and actually I should have summed up in a way. I think what we heard from both panelists is an aspiration, that they share an aspiration that their country should no longer have to be on the agenda of the Human Rights Council, but the way to do that is not for politics here to prevent discussion at the Council. It's for the country to actually change in a way that means there are not human rights violations that justify it being on the agenda of the Council. So I certainly didn't understand Namoka to be saying that she thought actually everything was okay in the country. But then also then the question to you, I think, was the second question.
You'll take some more questions and then how?
Well, sure. Actually, yeah, that's a good idea. So we'll take multiple questions, and then we'll come back to the panel. David?
I'm not sure if you'll manage to turn this into a question, but while sitting here, I've received some of the most disturbing news in a long time. I had a message from the South African member of the independent panel of experts that at the request of the Secretary General advised him on accountability in Sri Lanka in 2009. He sent me a quotation from a part report that was published in yesterday's Island in Sri Lanka, Island newspaper in Sri Lanka, which purports to be the conclusions of the International Advisory Council to the Commission on Missing Persons, but in fact is written by two members of that advisory council, Sir Desmond de Silva, British Sri Lankan Queen's Counsellor, and David Crane, the United States. The conclusion that was sent to me, and the person who sent it to me did it with the following comment: "This line takes the cake and is a clear sign how a great deal of cash delivers the goods." Just so that you know, the Sri Lankan newspapers themselves have reported that the two persons in question have been paid sums which run into the tens of thousands, in fact now over hundreds of thousands of dollars. The statement is, and this is their conclusion, and it's based on their quasi-legal opinion: "As unfortunate as it is, the civilian casualties that occurred at the end of the war should be considered as collateral damage, and the ultimate responsibility for their loss would rest on the LTTE due to their grave breaches of international humanitarian law." Now, this is chilling, not only because of the finding, but because of the fact that a group of people that was appointed by what the Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka referred to in this council chamber last 2 weeks ago to be an abhorrent regime, this group of people retained by the Rajapaksa regime has continued its work and continued to receive significant payment from the new government, in which many of us were placing huge hopes and had huge expectations. The whole of this statement from I do urge everybody to read this. It is really important, and it's certainly going to be central to the debate in the Human Rights Council in the months to come. The whole of this is an attempt to completely exonerate the armed forces of the government of Sri Lanka for the events of 2009. Now, I'm not one who will suggest that there was anything other than shared responsibility, but to try to exonerate one side of the conflict is pretty extraordinary.
Okay, thank you, David, for bringing that to attention. I just want, yes.
With due respect to others, I will be silent, but I would suggest that if Sri Lanka wishes to join the countries that are not on the agenda of the Human Rights Council, this is not the best way to go about it, and that this will, I hope, ensure that Sri Lanka remains very much on the agenda of the Human Rights Council for several years more, until it has demonstrated its will to address issues of truth, accountability, and reconciliation. Thank you.
Yes. And thank you, David. I think the other point, perhaps, is that this depending on the accuracy of this report, then the way in which the government responds to this will then be perhaps yet another to add to the list of indicators that Namalka set out to evaluate whether the commitments that have been made are in good faith or not. What will the immediate response of the government be to that report? Is there anyone else who would like to take the floor on really any topic related to the discussion? Yes?
So from my point, it's not for question, just to strengthen the points that my colleagues Omar mentions in terms of the restriction environment regarding to the CSO activities as well as the sexual violence cases. So from my perspective, so in terms of the sexual violence against women, I also agree with what my colleagues Omar mentioned in regarding the government's less taking actions on the issues, and as well as the the CSO situations. For example, up to now, according to our findings, that since the new government came up in Myanmar after 2011, any, how to say, judiciary or the local court or state court solve the case of the sexual violence in the country. I mean, nothing successful cases has happened until now. At the same time, according to the statistics of Women League of Burma, which is a network-based women organization combining with the ethnic women organizations, said that from between 2011 and up to 2014, there has been 127 sexual violent cases, including rape case, committed by the military regimes in those ethnic areas. And at the same time, as my colleague mentioned, that the government actions is obviously nothing, since the country has no rule of law, and also the judiciary system is not independent. But unfortunately, progress has also happened in terms of the international community assistance to those women-based organizations operating in the country. For example, right now, particularly in those urban areas, lots of the women forums or networks or organizations come up in the attention of the capacity building for those the ethnic women leaders and also the civil society leaders. Protections for promotion of the sexual violence, for the protection of sexual violence. At the same time, I see the progress in somehow is that now many international community like the US and other EU countries are awarding those the ethnic women leaders in terms of the Peace Awards and also the Women College Awards. I think this is also somehow good thing to keep the highlighting or promoting the women ethnic leadership roles that can somehow have the eliminating the sexual violence cases as well. So we still need this kind of support of assistance from the international community. And also in terms of the restrictions of civil society activists, as my colleague obviously mentioned, now the government use very smart tactics, the tricky tactics of against the CSO leaders or the activists. For example, they do a lot of co-optation, at the same time defamation or dignified actions to those the activist leader, as well as the counter surveillance and counter the strikes. For example, in the current student movement, many nationwide the student movement came up from different areas, but at the same time the government organized within their the education of ministry with those their own the school teacher to against those the student protesters. So these kinds of smart practice the government is also using. And
okay, thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you there because I see people are gathering outside for the next meeting, and there was one more request for the floor before we have some closing remarks from the panel. But thank you for those observations.
I'm from Emmanuel from Liberation. I just went out from what David said and what Imelda said, that in the next few months we are coming to a new coalition between the state government and the UN itself. The resolution has been deferred because of a request from the state and the proposers and things like that. For the Tamils who are affected, who are victims, they are shocked. They can understand the difference. And the High Commissioner has expressed hopes of going into the country and collecting new information that will even strengthen the report that is going to come out. But it's going to be very challenging because after the Foreign Minister came here and gave us very positive approach to the UN and promises made here, on the ground what is happening is that that they are not going to do any real cooperation. They are open for technical assistance to establish their local mechanism, but with regard to cooperating and opening the country to witnesses meeting the High Commissioner and things like that is going to be very, very difficult. We know the history of Louis Arbour and Navanidham Pillai, what they had when they went to Sri Lanka. I won't be surprised if SIDE also has something similar experience. All the same, the UN has to ask the question, it was referred to by Malka also, whether it is the Rajapaksa government or Sirisena government, people changing and making positive promises or confrontation that can change. But the UN is unable to address itself to the state structure and to the states that is called the sovereign, unitary state and democratic state. Because in dealing with heads of governments and ministers, you can go against all. But if there is a fundamental structure in the state which has to be examined, this is going to be the litmus test for this organization. The member states, they can, by change of governments and change of leaders, make promises and, invite and let them go. But it's going to be a very, very delicate period in which, up to September and afterwards, whether the Sri Lankan government, calling itself a member of this community of nations, enjoying the benefits of the UN body, support to the war and support to all these things, whether it will keep up to its promises of collaborating sincerely with the UNHCR in finding the truth and justice and accountability. That is going to be the test, and we are really surprised that UN, after the panel report, the 3 people, and the Petrine report, they have failed, and this is the third chance, and this may be the last chance. If they do not deal with the fundamental structures of the government as it is now, which has a big chance, they do not deal with the population, civic leaders, fundamental structures, nothing would help the country. Only with some fundamental changes in the structures of the government that has been going on, into a certain injustice, we can hope for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for your interventions. I think we have about 120 seconds left. So, Namalka, is there anything you would like to respond within 60 seconds to what's been discussed?
I think you made the clarification with regard to what I said, so thank you very much. Sometimes you understand better, but not everybody will understand. The reason why Sri Lanka is in conflict is that perception you have of what other person says and what the other person hears. So I think I would like to just say that Sri Lanka will have to remain in item 4 for quite a long time, because I think we are going through trying time, and no political leader or no people could be able to resolve that anything within 24 hours. So I think the fact that we had come to Geneva in 2005 with our Tamil colleagues from the north who were affected, who lived in Sri Lanka, with great difficulty we had to bring them, despite the visa regimes. The Swiss embassy, nor the German embassy, nor the European embassies have been kind enough to extend visa. Somebody is given visa only for 2 days, 3 days, and we have to pack them off. So one has to also understand, we would have loved to have people from the north, victims from the north. We have worked with them, and I think we also need to bear that in mind.
I'm sorry,
Thank you.
I see the person in charge of the room giving me the evil eye through the door. So sorry about that, but Omar, any final words?
Very quickly, I just want to say that thank you, and also just want to reiterate that Burma Myanmar needs to remain under item 4. My understanding is item 4 is the government's responsibility, and for the country's people's human rights situation. So as long as the Burma Myanmar government continue to deny the reality of the human rights violations of the people of their own country, then the Burma Myanmar has to be under the item 4 with your full attention and support. And I hope that all of you here on the council will really